I grew up never allowed to go celebrate Halloween. We were a very religious family, and that's just not what we did. So the same thing goes with horror. I didn't grow up watching it. But you know what? Around the time I started getting out of high school, becoming an adult, I just started catching up with all of it. So October is my time I catch up with all the horror movies. So we're going to go through all of them, and let's just see how it goes. This movie feels scary but real. It barely even feels like the genre of horror. I think that just comes down to Trey Edward Schultz. He just has a very tangible way of directing. You feel the fear, you feel the desire, you feel the uncertainty. It's almost like you can touch the ground and like smell the air. His movies have a lot to do with like family bonds, and at the end of the day they all go to disaster, and this movie just goes off on that disaster. It goes to this crazy spiraling down. It gets claustrophobic, especially with the aspect ratio tightens up the worse the disaster gets. This one truly is pretty underrated. So, this is Scream 5. It's just called Scream, but it is just Scream 5. And I think it makes sense why it needs to be just called Scream, because it's just like the first movie. There is very little they do differently. I think that's just having to do that they're having to reboot the franchise, bring new life to it. So they do all the things that the first Scream did. Now, I haven't seen anything past the first Scream, but this pretty much feels like the first Scream. It does have that Force Awakens kind of feel to it, where you're bringing back the old characters after a long period of time. It does have this really cool self-aware idea to it. And the humor is pretty good. Some of the twists and turns are fun, but it sometimes just feels really annoying just to see all these super nerdy people talk about super nerdy weird. I mean, maybe it's a dumb reflection on myself, but it just feels uncomfortable. They also updated the cinematography to look more crisp, more like a horror movie, because the rest of them look like comedies. So I do appreciate that. One thing I will say though is like, guys who are getting stabbed, they're getting stabbed like a bunch of times and they're still alive. Like Jenna Ortega should have died on her first scene. But I guess that's just how these movies are. Okay, way better than the last one. I really think that just boils down to this one just mixes the bag completely. Like in the opening scene, they already established who Ghostface is in this franchise. He's not the kind of psychopath that sees humans as like some kind of weird thing. Like he's just there for the fans. This one is a little bit more subversive than the other one. And the characters really now have street cred. They kill people. Like they're leveling out the playing field. They're making the world more interesting in that way. And I'm excited to see what they're going to do in Scream 7. This is some really good character work. Everybody feels unique, like they have their own philosophy and they have their own past. But, Mia Goth is the standout, for sure. She plays her younger self and an older lady, and she does an amazing job. This movie does feel like just good old-fashioned movie schlock fun, but this does have a deeper idea about it, about aging and facing death, and, how young people are very, very selfish. Mia Goth. Looking at her performance, feels like looking at Daniel Day-Lewis performance. Like she is so captivating and just commits to everything she's doing, and it can be funny in one end but super heartbreaking the other end in minutes. She can control that screen like no one else. I want to see more from her. What I also noticed about this movie, it's very nostalgic. It's full of color, full of spectacle, and it looks like an old movie, but done in a current way. David Cornsweet's good in this. I know he's the new Superman, and he does have that demeanor, even though he's very much a kind of a pervert. And at the end of the day, this really is about how young people are very selfish and they're willing to forsake older people just to get what they want. Again, that's not for everyone, but I think it's consistent. I think it's captivating. Definitely out of my favorites so far. The first thing I think about this movie is just how amazing the screenplay is. I mean, this movie doesn't break down ever. It's always having fun with their characters. Everybody, again, very unique. And they say the stupidest things, mainly because they're all Gen Z, so it's like looking at a mirror. But it's incredible what they do, especially that main character. I mean, like, she's here dropped in a bunch of people that she doesn't know and trying to be fun and cool and fit in. And I mean, I get where she's coming from, and an amazing plot twist. Jack Stuber's Opal is so far the scariest thing I've seen. Even though this is just a short film, it's very expressionistic and abstract. The way they use voices, clay, and I'm gonna tell you, linen, the way they use linen in this movie might be the scariest part of this movie. It's undersaturated, it has a very high frame rate, and I mean, those are really weird things to put in a movie, and it really unsettles you. If I were to give an interpretation to this movie, I think it's about the fear of people in need. When you go out of your comfort zone and you meet people who are in need, it can be a little daunting and feel like overwhelmed, like I can't do anything about you. Kudos to Adult Swim for making this. This is a way simpler movie than I thought it'd be. It does have that very scrappy indie film vibe. I mean, the acting's kind of bad, but it's also charming because you know that this was made in a shoestring budget and they try to make the best with what they had. I thought it was pretty cool. Well, the teenage drama part, that's the one that really, it had the best in it. I mean, that's the one that I felt like had the best potential in it, the most fun. We just saw all the characters interact. But the thing is, the killer is not Jason. The whole reason I went to see this movie was to see Jason Voorhees, and he's not even in there. This might just be the most disappointing movie I've seen so far. No, it is the most disappointing movie I've seen so far. The beginning was a snooze fest, and that lead in the beginning, not great. But we got to our official lead, and she was pretty good. Not the best actor in the group. That would go to the one who actually became the most famous out here. But she was a charming lead. And this movie is remembered as one of the best horror movies, but it is very, very, very 80s. The hair is 80s. The music is 80s. The acting is 80s. It very much is a time capsule. And I don't know why they made the Freddy versus Jason, because this is nothing like Friday the 13th. This movie is crazy, and this movie starts boring, but the farther it goes, the better it gets. And there's a bunch of twists and turns. And then the more you hear about Freddy, the more you understand Freddy, the less you understand him. And it makes him a more formidable foe. Absolutely, the most exciting thing on this list is Purge Anarchy. I mean, these movies look like straight up hell. And I think that's just because of the inspirations. It's a bit Halloween, but it's also Mad Max. At the end of the day, it feels just like a holiday, like 4th of July or like Halloween. But instead of fun, it's all murder. The last one's more of a home invasion, but this one feels more like the city, the culture. I think the casting's very interesting, specifically Frank Grillo, because he seems like this tough guy who seems like an action lead. But in this movie, because he's so tough, you would believe, okay, maybe this guy doesn't have great intentions. I mean, the whole thing, you really realize it's an excellent franchise. There's so many places to go, and it's basically just making murder and politics, putting those two together. Who would have thought? This is an amazing premise. It's about a kid and his toy, but his toy is a killer. It's incredible. You can go so many places for this. It makes sense why it became a franchise. The more technology grows, the better the stories and the more interesting the stories get. Although this one I just believe is a complete masterpiece from front to back. It did start in a way I didn't expect it to. It reminded me of Something Like It Hot. It started as like a crime thriller, and then boom, it became a horror movie. Now I put this in the thumbnail, so I just feel compelled. I have to talk about it. But I do feel unqualified because I fell asleep through all of it. No, not all of it. A bunch of it, but not all of it. I will say I'm happy to see Josh Hutcherson back in the big screen. I think he was overdue for a comeback, and he works really well. I can really feel his emotion. The cast is pretty good, but I think he's the best. Animatronics, I'm happy to see them. It's very much like the games, although I didn't play the games. I'm glad to see it really does actually translate. But at the end of the day, I just kind of felt lukewarm at this movie. At least I got to see Matt Pat, which made me exceedingly happy. But yeah, I learned a lot. I was happy to see some of the classics I've never watched. I've been watching things now that I've been putting off to watch. And it showed me a lot of the things that are my strong suits and the things I still need to watch. I realized I'm not that good at watching older movies, and that's something I need to practice. Maybe this channel is a place where I can practice to watch the things I'm uncomfortable to watch. All that said, I've got a lot of new ideas coming, a lot more videos, and I want you to stay tuned.